I just want to compare Expedia and Booking for a moment. And clearly, two great companies. I mean, define that whole space. Why is Booking, or why do you think Booking is so much leaner specifically than Expedia, or the cost base in terms of, I think it's like Expedia has 2 billion roughly OPEX or fixed cost versus Booking's under half of that. I mean, what is the
Yeah.
major difference here in the way they operate?
Yeah. In order to answer this question, I have to give you a little bit of context to how the companies, came about. It really, I think, will explain, the differences and how they've evolved over time. So, in the U.S., Hotels.com, I think, was one of the first. Expedia, maybe in a second, in terms of developing an OTA kind of strategy going to market. Um, there was a company called IAC, Interactive Corp, that very early on recognized that these businesses in the internet could disrupt big industries. And Barry Diller was the chairman of this company, and basically decided to start buying companies up and rolling them up, if you will, and creating more of a conglomerate. So he started IAC, and they bought up a bunch of companies. Match.com was one of their first. They bought Hotels.com on the travel side, actually before Expedia, and then Expedia and Hotwire and TripAdvisor and so on and so forth. And so I came along in 2004 on the Hotels.com side, and IAC had just bought all these companies up, and Barry had realized, I think, that the majority of his portfolio within IAC were travel companies, and therefore, why don't I just separate them out and create an umbrella company, Expedia Group? And so that's what we did. And underneath the Expedia umbrella, these businesses that I talked about, Expedia, Hotels.com, Hotwire, TripAdvisor, they were all kind of allowed to operate independently. And so even competing in some cases. Dara Khosrowshahi was the CEO at the time, and he really felt like it would create agility and competition amongst the groups if we allowed them to operate independently. And there were conversations back early in that stage where, hey, why don't we roll some of these things up so that we don't duplicate marketing and technology and HR and finance and all that stuff. But what we learned through research and understanding customer behavior at the time was that really some of these business, or all of these businesses, were tailoring themselves to different customer sets. So if you think about Expedia, it's full service, hotel, car, air, even in market kind of services, tours and so forth. So more of a complete vacation trip. Whereas Hotels.com, its primary focus was on a 1 or 2 night stay and a Friday, Saturday night within a 4-hour driving distance of your home city. Hotwire was, the discounted, opaque, provider. So they all operated kind of against different skills or customer sets. And I will say, the competition that happened within those businesses was really good. I mean, it helped us move faster, and we grew like crazy during that time period. But it came at the cost of having duplicate technology, duplicate marketing, duplicate spend, competing against each other in the auction of Google. And so that's kind of how Expedia grew up. On the other hand, Booking started a little bit later than we did. And one, growing up in Europe, based in Amsterdam, they really quickly understood multicultural, multi-currency, multi-language aspects of building websites in Europe. We didn't, because we were US based. They focused on one brand that only did one product, and that was hotels. They didn't do any TV in the beginning. It was all Google, and they just got really good at it. And so they were able to move quickly. They had a different model too, an agency model, which is, the consumer pays after the stay, versus Expedia in the US was accustomed to paying at the time of booking. That was good for the US, but not good for the rest of the world. So when we tried to compete in Europe against that model with booking, we had a mismatch. It was a gap in the marketplace, like we talked about earlier. And so those are some of the key differences there. And then over time, the weight of carrying the duplicative technology and duplicative marketing and all that stuff has added up. And that's why you see the different cost structures that you do between the two businesses.
I've never understood why Expedia's kept it like that. I mean, I know things are changing now, and Barry Diller's taking the helm, and I think he's enforcing some change in his style. But I think
Yeah.
it just seems to me like I agree at the beginning. That's how it evolved. It seems like it's a bit outdated. And how do you how do you feel about that? How that evolved, and maybe what prevented the change during that time?
Yeah, I think you're right. It's evolved for sure, and there's different. There's a few things that have happened along the way that have allowed Expedia to think differently about this. One is the competition has become hyper over the last 5 6 years, not just between Expedia and Booking, but also meta providers and Google in particular. And so that Google factor has become a massive issue in this space for the OTAs. Um, in the 2014 time period, Expedia bought Travelocity and actually moved that brand onto the stack, the technology stack that Expedia sits on. So that gave Expedia the confidence that they could do this. They could move things to one stack and over time. So that allowed them to buy Orbitz and go on and buy a few others, What and Australia and so forth. So over the last few years, I think Expedia has been trying to slim that down a little bit and build technology that benefits all the brands. But it's been a little bit slow to go, and I think that's probably, I don't have any insider information on this. I think that's just part of some of the leadership changes that have happened recently. They were already thinking in this direction, but maybe Barry wanted to go a little bit faster.
Mm. Do they actually have the same inventory on the same platforms as well, or is it because that like I think that's where it also gets confusing as well. From you see same inventory on different brands that you have.
Yeah, so in the beginning it was separate, primarily between Hotels.com and Expedia had separate inventory, and Hotwire had separate inventory. Over time, so that probably changed in the 2008-9 time period, where all three of those brands were basically pulling from the same inventory and technology stack on the back end. So that helped a lot. But in terms of the front end technology, that is, well, when I was there and over the last few years, it has been different up until some of these new brands coming on board with Expedia buying Travelocity and Orbitz and so forth.